Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Think about the last 3 people promoted into leadership in your organization. Were they genuinely were the highest performers? Or were they the most visible, the most vocal, the most politically connected, the ones who interview well and manage upwards brilliantly? Because there is a difference, and most organizations have no reliable system to tell those two things apart. The result is that mediocrity gets institutionalized. Real top performance get overlooked, underdeveloped, or eventually lost to a competitor who figured out what your organization missed. And the cycle repeats quarter after quarter, performance review after performance review, while the 9-box grid collects dust and the talent problem quietly gets worse. My guest today has spent decades on the front lines of these problems, hiring, promoting, coaching, and developing hundreds of people across some of the most performance-driven environments in business. Jamison Carrier is the founder of Team NavX, author of Building a Championship Team, and one of the most direct voices I have come across on what actually separates top performers from everyone else, and how to build a system that finds them before your competition does. Jamison, welcome to the Growth Hacking Culture Podcast. I'm really glad to have this conversation with you.
Hey, Ivan. Yes, thank you. Appreciate it. And grateful to invest some time with you.
Listen, I have so many questions because I had the opportunity to go through your book. And one of my first questions that came to my mind was, you have been hiring, coaching, and developing hundreds of people across your career, from building dealership groups to founding Team NavX. After all that, how do you actually define a top performers? There is so many discussions about how to define the top performers, even between human resources in the same company. So I wanted to have your definition, a human definition that anyone can understand about what is a top performance.
Well, look, everyone is a top performer until you pull out the scoreboard. And that's why clarity matters. If you don't define winning and then you measure it, then performance becomes an opinion. And so one of the things that we have to do is look at, top performer. Like, that implies that we're not talking about everyone. Not everyone is a top performer. So for us, we're consistently looking for someone that's ranking in the top 10% of their peer group. Because if there's 100 people and they're all doing the same job, but you're always in that top 10%, that's not luck. That's who you are. So in our system, it shows up because the target is clearly defined, and then we measure it consistently and accurately so you know exactly where you stand.
If I understand correctly, you are saying that performance is about what you are delivering today, nothing to do with potential.
That's it. No, that's it. I mean, potential matters, but what have you done for me lately? What are you doing to perform in your current position? Where we miss it is we don't define what winning looks like. And that is the key. Once you define that, then you can separate who the top performers are.
Now, I want to be a little bit more provocative.
Right.
Is the corporate world actually terrible at identifying top performers? And are we systematically promoting the wrong people into leadership because we confuse charisma, I know how to talk, to convince people, to influence people, with capability?
Yeah, so two things. Number one, I would say that too many times it comes back to what I just said. Winning isn't even defined. So we're in situations where we don't know what winning looks like. If there's no clear definition of winning, then how would we know if someone is actually a top performer? Second, though, we found that a big part of the problem is what we refer to as interviewability. It's a Team NavXism. Interviewability is where candidates are really good at the interview process, whether it's a candidate to be hired or a candidate to be promoted. They're great at the interview process, but we have to understand that there are things within the interview that don't necessarily equate to performance. Love Lou Adler. If you've ever read any of his stuff, Lou Adler refers to 4 A's that impact interviews, but they do not predict performance. And we all have to be aware of these because we all have certain biases with these: affable, articulate, assertive, attractive. These are things that, may impact the way we feel about somebody. It may help them ace the interview. And so we can get so hung up on any of those 4 A's, but they don't predict performance. That's why we have to have clarity. We've got to have a scoreboard, and then we're not guessing who the top performers are. It's obvious.
I know that there's a couple of tools that are used in order to assess a candidate. Now, some of the tools that date like from the 70s, 80s, 90s. So do we have better tools today to predict that this guy is a good fit and at the same time someone who can do the job correctly?
Yeah, look, there are endless number of tools out there, and I think all of them add value if we use them correctly. There's one of the newer tools that are out there is, are you familiar with Six Working Genius?
No,
So
tell me.
Pat Lencioni, who every business leader has heard of, Pat Lencioni has developed the 6 types of working genius, and what he's found is that all of us have two. There's these 6 traits. We have two that are geniuses. They give us energy when we operate within them. We have two that are frustrations for us, and then we have two that are just, they're right in the middle. They're our competencies. We've learned with certain positions that we need people to have certain strengths within this structure. And so if you structure properly, people, if they're doing what they enjoy doing and it meets the way that they're actually built, then they will have more success in those positions. Ultimately, the best predictor of future success is always going to be history. So, regardless of what tool you use, we've got to work with people that have a history, a track record of top performance.
Now, you were mentioning a little bit about the human biases that we have in order to judge someone, like the way people looks, if you're well dressed, if you're articulate, if you are assertive, and so on. Is that like an open door for AI who might have less biases?
Absolutely. Look, I'm not an expert in AI. I know that it's endless, what AI can do for us, and certainly it can be used in helping to develop some of the clarity that we need when we look at positions and all that. I have not mastered AI in probably in any way. Certainly not in identifying top performers. If you do, please let me know. I'll learn something from you.
According to you, what could be these 2 or 3 behavioral signals that, in your experience, almost never lie? The things that genuinely predict whether someone will perform at the highest level, regardless of their background or resume.
Yeah, I just mentioned Pat Lencioni. He's got a lot of good stuff. But when you say that, it makes me think of his. He says the ideal team member is someone who is hungry, humble, and smart. And man, there's so much to that. I mean, we could spend the rest of our time talking about that. Hungry, humble, and smart. If someone possesses those 3 traits, then I guarantee you they're going to be coachable. So being coachable is key. And I think the other trait that we overlook so often is a competitive drive. If someone has a strong drive to compete, they're going to perform if you put them in an environment where they can win.
The hungry and what the
Hungry, humble,
humble,
and smart.
hungry and humble, I don't have any problem to detect. The smart part is a little bit tricky because what type of smart type are we talking about? Are we talking about something that is intellectual and intellectually smart, or like street smart? Define me a little bit more this story about smart.
Yeah, well, Ivan, you are an expert in human behavior. So I would imagine you probably pick up on that quicker than what than what you're indicating. But here's the thing. It's not about education. Education is very important in certain positions. Like, if I sure hope that if I'm having surgery, I hope that doctor has more than a couple of years of education. It's important, right? But it's not that. There are plenty of smart people who don't have even a college education. And we see, we're seeing massive companies within the US, certainly, that are making these shifts where they're saying, where they used to say, oh, a 4-year degree is necessary, where they're pulling back on that a little bit. Somebody has the ability to learn. And if you're hungry and you're humble, then you just have to be smart enough to learn and to make decisions on your own. And that's why in our interview process, one of the things that we do is we say, hey, here's clearly defined what we expect you to be able to do. Tell me how you would go about doing that. So in the interview process, now, if I'm interviewing you, Ivan, I ask you, hey, how would you go about actually doing this? Then I can identify, even if you've never done that specifically, how you think, how you process, how you get to a solution, how you ask the questions. And those are the people that are smart enough to do the job.
I love this definition of smart that is related to your capacity to learn, because that you can practice it if you want in university, but it's not like really the core of university. It's the acquisition of knowledge more than the practice, the meta skill that you have to practice to be able to understand a concept and make it real. And I like that. And the also that intellectually, let me give you an example. People believes, like, I live in Switzerland, so that's what I told you, that most of the people in Switzerland have a university degree. In fact, it's only 27% of the population who has a university degree. There is many people who decides to do a profession like electrician, like people to build houses. But it is a profession, so you have to go to school to learn that type of things. And in Switzerland, you don't get someone saying, yeah, but you didn't do studies. Like, I remember back in Latin America, how much they talk about making studies. And even if you study, you don't have a work. While here in Switzerland, if you don't decide not to go for high school and so on, it is something normal. And what I have noticed is that intellectually, these people has developed the capacity to learn on their own, to develop their own business, to find alternative ways to find a job and be successful, because it is true that the level of poverty in Switzerland is very low. It's because people still maintain that capacity to learn. They read, they discuss about things. I like the fact that in the world that we live today, intellectual capacity is not the most critical element to be successful in your work. I wish
Yeah.
there was more than that, because then there is a lot of good universities who will lose their edge about to have with the cost that it costs a bomb, no? In most of the places in the world. And by the way, in Switzerland, it doesn't cost much having an education.
Are
But
you
in other
recruiting
places,
people to move to Switzerland?
sorry.
Are you recruiting us to move to Switzerland?
By the way, it's not a bad bet. In fact, it's a little bit expensive, the life here, but otherwise, well, I learned about the cost of health care in the United States. In fact, in Switzerland, it's cheaper, even though we don't have we are not sponsored by the government to go for health care. It is cheaper still.
Well,
Uh,
here, what to your point, what I believe is this, sometimes at different levels of education, we try to teach people what to think instead of how to think. And I would use my dad as an example. When he was just finishing eighth grade, his father passed away, and there was no one else to do it. My dad had to take over the family farm with an eighth grade education, and that's what he was going to have to get through life. But my dad understood how to think, and he understood how to learn, and he didn't just give up. He didn't use that as an excuse. As a matter of fact, he later in life, even up into probably his 40s and 50s, he was taking courses at, the local Ivy Tech, which is a technical college. Just finding ways to continue to learn more so that he could learn more and accomplish more. And that's really it. It's all about learning how to think and then how to apply that to our careers and the rest of our lives.
And this is the point where when you were mentioning that these three letters, hungry, humble, and smart, this humble thing that you are humble enough to acknowledge, I can if I do the if I do the effort, or I'm not now. I don't have the capacity, the capabilities to do it, but I can learn. That's intense, good drive for success. I'm totally with you.
Humility with confidence.
Yes, yes. Um, you have built your system around clarity and accountability. And then I was thinking a little bit like clarity and accountability as the core drivers for performance. And then I was thinking a little bit about neuroscience, who tell us that autonomy, so the capacity to decide on your own, and psychological safety, which is saying without fear of retaliation or whatsoever, are equally critical. That's what the point of view of neuroscience, especially now that we have understood a little bit more the effects of these elements into our brain. Are most high performance cultures actually undermining the very people they are trying to develop?
Yeah,
That
so
would be
Ivan,
like
you got some tremendous guests that we talk about being smart, much smarter than I am when it comes to the neuroscience and all of the aspects that go into. I'm not going to pretend I understand every aspect of that. But I love this question because I think a lot of people confuse autonomy with a lack of accountability. And maybe when you hear accountability, you might assume that there's no autonomy, or you assume that like autonomy is a freedom from structure, or accountability is someone else is controlling you. Those things aren't true. And high performers don't want less accountability. They want clear expectations. And here's what's key: they want a freedom to execute. So in our system, we have the map that gives us the mission, the actions, the performance that defines what by when. So the system defines what by when. The individual owns the how. That's real autonomy. And it's psychological safety, which is the other thing that is so important that we're all talking about. Where is the safety? And if you clearly define the what by when within the map, then a team member is completely safe in that. And then the autonomy comes because they have the ability to determine the how. If you want a person to feel unsafe, don't don't define what winning is. How can they be safe if they don't even know how to win? And that's what we do so many times. If you give them a scoreboard, if you give them consistent feedback, then they feel safe. So again, top performers aren't running from accountability. They're running to environments where they know how to win.
you have used the word clarity, and then just now you used the word mission. Is that clarity slash mission related to having objectives like a number, or is more like an intention, like an inspiring intention, like in the world of OKR, and not just a number? What is it exactly?
It's
This is
it's
what we
all
want
the
to
it's
achieve.
all the
Yes.
above. It takes both. It absolutely takes both.
Okay. So people, when they get a number, or an intention. They can have in both cases this level of clarity to say, I can find my way to reach there, as
Yeah.
long as we don't push them to tell them this is how you should do it. That's far
Yes.
away.
Yeah, the number is clearly defined. You need to do what by when, but the other piece of it is the value system. What are the values that we must have? What are the values that we are aspiring to have? And both of those need to be defined. And in order to be a part of our team, you have to espouse those values, or certainly be aspiring to, to reach those values. And so as long as those are clearly defined, and I'm not talking about a poster, but something that we live and talk about, it is our culture, because your culture is going to be whatever you allow. You may as well define it. And then you have clearly defined objectives on the numbers. That's an environment where people can win, they can be safe, and they have what they're looking for.
Hmm. The There is a question that I really wanted to push over to you. Can we convert an average performer into a top performer? Or are we just polishing someone who was already there?
Well, so this is a question that we've talked a lot about on our team. Here's the deal: strong leaders, they want to believe that they can, in fact, coach anyone into being a top performer, and some of us more so than others. I don't personally believe that you can. You can develop people. There's no question, and you can develop people. But remember, we're talking about top performers. If we are, in fact, talking about top 10%, then it is exclusive. Look, you can improve my jump shot. I'm from Indiana. It's a basketball state. And if I had the right coach, you could improve my field goal percentage. But that doesn't mean I'm going to get a contract in the NBA. Like it's not going to happen. And I think it's possibly even more complicated than that, because skills are easier to train than behaviors. We talked about numbers and culture. Skills are trainable. Behaviors, not so much. And so in our system, again, everything is running through that map. So if someone understands the mission, they know the actions to get there, and then they see the scoreboard, but they're still not progressing, then it's not a clarity issue, right? It's a lack of capacity, it's a lack of drive, it's a lack of discipline. And so, look, all great leaders develop the right people. Average leaders try to fix the wrong ones. And you don't build championship teams by hoping that average people become top performers. You build it by selecting the right people, then you develop them on to the next level. Because if you invest too much time just trying to turn average people into elite performers, you're going to risk losing the top performers you have.
Totally get it. That part of you, not everybody can become a top performer, but you can make them better of what they are today.
That's right.
And the second part of what you said is that it is less critical to invest so too much into the average performers who have become or can become a little bit better. Is that correct, or I misunderstood
I,
my
I want to
reading of?
invest my time into the top performers.
Uh-huh.
If I'm investing all of my time into the people that are not performing, trying to get them to perform better, and I'm ignoring the top performers, I'm just going to run them off. Dave Anderson says, that eagles they don't hang around with turkeys. And I'm not calling people turkeys, but you understand the analogy. While eagles are soaring, you've got to work with them. You can't invest your time in people that aren't hungry, humble, and smart, that don't have a desire to get better, because you're going to end up wasting your own resources.
Mm. The way we learn stuff in the corporate, Jamison, it hasn't changed forever. So the usual trainings of 2 days, very little practice, not enough money to have a coach. I mean, and even the boss doesn't have enough confidence on himself to be a good coach. He could be a mentor maximum, and that's it. Uh, what is your take on that? Is the way we train people in corporate bullshit?
The way that we train them? Yeah,
Yeah, in the
I
corporate world, we
yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that for the most part, we lack clarity in our training. We've got to set clearly defined expectations. And again, do you have the right people? If so, are they hungry, humble, and smart? And if you have the right people, then give them the tools that they need to succeed. And you know, ultimately, if you give them the tools that they need to succeed, they'll find a way to figure it out. And they'll figure out, they'll seek out with you if you they'll seek out the information that they need in order to be successful on their job.
personally, let's say that we are in the case that you have a very good performer. He's a sales guy. Throw them on
I like
on the
something.
floor.
Yeah.
Sales guy who is a top performer. He knows how to sell. He's always hitting the target, but he has lost this hunger to learn more, to go beyond that, like to go beyond, not be beyond the scope of his work. So this guy could be something else, could be the next CEO, but he's just fine reaching his target. Would you get rid of that person?
Well, I don't think there's a blanket answer for that, Ivan. And look, I've been a part of organizations, and there are plenty of organizations out there that they only want to work with people that want to be promoted. And so if you're not reaching for the next position, then they're going to push you out. I don't think that's always wisdom. I think we need those people. We need people that are growing. But if there's someone that wants to be a salesperson for the rest of their career, why would we run them off? If they're performing at a high level and they're selling, they're hitting their targets, they're doing it without causing a bunch of drama, right? They live by the culture that is defined. Why would we run them off? I think you allow them to perform. The opposite is worse. Are you familiar with the Peter principle? Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I have heard about that.
So for any listeners that maybe aren't familiar with it, the Peter principle was actually a guy named Peter who decades ago, it was actually in a satire book, but it's so true. He said that we promote to the level of incompetence. So if somebody is a good salesperson, we say, man, they sold X number of widgets last month. We need to make them a sales manager. Well, sales manager, yeah, they need to be able to sell, but they need to be able to recruit a team. They need to be able to train. They need to have, more interaction. All these different tools. And so that person was a great salesperson. We promote them to sales manager, and they're incompetent at that level. And so then, what happens to that person? We say, oh, well, you're not getting the job done. So then we let them go, or they get frustrated and leave, and they become the best salesperson at our competitor. Versus, or maybe they are a great sales manager. You promoted them to that. They become a sales manager, and then you promote them to a district, whatever the next position is, a general manager. You promote them up to that level, and they don't know how to run a P&L. You should have left them as a sales manager. The thing is when we promote strictly based on performance and not on a clearly defined objective for the next one, that's when we get ourselves in trouble. And I went a little bit off subject from your question, but there's nothing wrong if someone's performing at the level they're at. I personally don't believe we should part ways because they're not reaching for the next promotion. I think we should embrace that. I think we should reward it and help them be successful where they are.
That is true. And there is an element of loyalty. I think that if people are delivering their best and this is what they want, let's be loyal. We are not
Yes.
perfect. They are
Yeah.
not.
Performance is loyalty.
Mm, exact. There is this belief in large organizations that, and these organizations have like performance review systems, competency frameworks, 9-box grids, and all that, tralala, and yet mediocrity persists at scale. I was in a company kind of similar to that. Are these tools broken by design, or are they being used by people who don't actually want to confront underperformance?
Yeah. Great question. I think any of our tools could be better, right? There's no question we can get better tools. We can improve the tools that we have. But I'd rather have average tools with execution than the best tool in the world that we're not willing to use. We've got to be willing to use the tools that we have. I look at so many times like, you know, companies invest millions of dollars into software. It's going to make, everything better, but then they don't use it. It's not the software's fault. It's not the tool's fault. And it's the same thing is true with any process that we put into place. We've got to put review frameworks in place, right? But then we've got to be willing to tell the truth. And I think a lot of these companies, they've got the review there, but it's uncomfortable to tell the truth. So they don't want to. So what good did the review actually do? We've seen companies that have put a scoreboard into place, but then they didn't update it or it wasn't accurate for whatever reason. So you've got to have a consistent, accurate scoreboard. If not, performance becomes an opinion. And I think that most leaders recognize that underperformance, but they struggle with the uncomfortableness of addressing it. It's not comfortable. Winning's not supposed to be easy. In the book, we talk about the family versus team concept. And at some point, you've got to come to terms with, do you want to have a family at your organization or do you want to have a team? It's got to be one or the other. Now, how would you define that? On the far end of the family spectrum is, hey, that's Aunt Betty. She's been working here for 30 years. It doesn't matter if she shows up, if she does her job, whatever, she's never going to be fired. That's Aunt Betty, right? The far other extreme would be a professional sports team, or maybe if you're into fantasy football, maybe your fantasy football team, whatever it is, where you don't care about whose feelings are hurt, whatever, you just want to win. Somewhere we all fall in that spectrum. And for me, I want to have a team at work. And by the way, the team, you have each other's back. It's not about being impersonal. You've got to have each other's back, but it has to be about winning. Winning is something that we do together as a team. And mediocrity, it doesn't survive because we lack the systems. It survives because we tolerate it. And the best organizations may have great tools, but what really sets them apart is that the leaders are willing to use those tools to tell the truth. You got to keep score. You got to make decisions based on performance, not comfort.
In your definition of winning, do you consider only results or the how people are getting there? Like if you have a natural liar, somebody who is polluting the cohesion of the organization, would you do something about it? How would you put a metric behind the values that you want your company or your team to represent?
Yeah, the values are non-negotiable. So again, I talked about you can have aspiring values, but you have to have non-negotiable values. And if you have someone that is not living by those non-negotiables, you're probably not going to fix it. There's the four quadrants that a lot of business leaders have used, where you have performance going this direction and going horizontally. You have values, and the best people are living in the top right corner. They have performance and they espouse the values. Those are the very best ones. If you have someone where they espouse the values, but the performance isn't there, you might fix that with training and coaching and development clarity. But if you have someone that they have the performance, but the values aren't there, that's really hard to fix.
Listen, in your area of expertise, um, there is like at least in Europe, every two streets you find people who are more or less partially or completely in the same area of identifying talent, developing talent. What is it that what makes Team NavX unique?
Look, we're built on a foundation of clarity. So we have clearly defined systems that work. And again, you mentioned the book Building a Championship Team, and we've had a good response to the book, but I'm more of an author. These are proven systems that work. And so it starts with clarity. We start with the map that clearly defines what the mission, the actions, the performance is. And and as long as you have that clarity and then you follow it with the development aspect of it, it's going to work. It will work every single time.
Hmm. Yeah, I I believe so. Yeah. Tell me, so how can people reach you out if they have questions about your methodology or how to change a little bit of these problems that always happen at work? How can they reach you out, Jameson?
Yeah, best way is jamisoncarrier.com. JAMISON carrier.com. You can reach me on there. Pretty easy to get a hold of. I'd love to share ideas. Maybe you're listening. You're like, man, what did he mean by that? Let's have a discussion about it. Or maybe you see an area that I'm wrong. Point it out. I'm still growing. I'm a work in progress.
I love this humbleness that you have, Jamison. It was really lovely to speak to you to understand a little bit better about an area that I hardly touch. By the way, this story about hiring and developing talent, but I'm very critical about that. In fact, of the practices that many corporations are using today, and I love this angle that you mentioned that it is better to have an old system that it is not perfect, but it is used consistently and well executed than having all these expensive SAP whatever that cost a bomb and nobody uses.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, it all comes back to execution.
Thank you very much, James. And I'm going to be putting the link to your website and also your LinkedIn profile, by the way, so because now it has become so easy to send a message to someone in LinkedIn. Thank you very much for your nice and kind time with me.
Thank you, Ivan.